Undercover boss orders steak. Waitress secretly slips him a note that stops him cold. Hello, everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's get back to our main character. The ones who do the work don't get the tips. The one who gets them is the manager's nephew. She said it so casually, as if it was nothing unusual. No one questioned it, no one checked. But sitting at that very table, disguised under a plain black cap and a worn gray shirt, was a man who had built the entire chain from the ground up. His name was Jackson Reeves, though here, nobody knew it. The words hit him like a slow crack splitting glass. He didn't move, didn't even raise an eyebrow. Only the faint tightening of his jaw betrayed the shift. Across the table sat a glass of red wine he hadn't touched. In his hand, a folded note the waitress had slipped silently beside the plate. 5 words, scrawled in hurried ink. This is a trap. Don't react. Around him, the restaurant gleamed, chandeliers spilling warm light across polished wood tables. The hum of low conversations mixed with the faint clink of silverware. From a distance, it looked flawless. But Jackson knew better. He had seen the body language, the half-hidden glances, the way some servers hovered near the register without lifting a single tray. He stayed quiet, letting the moment breathe. Observation was always the first step. The waitress, sleeves frayed but apron spotless, moved briskly between tables. She wasn't fast, she wasn't loud, but she was steady, intentional. Meanwhile, 2 young men leaned against the POS terminal, laughing lightly while customers flagged for refills. Their hands stayed idle, except when another credit card passed through the screen. Jackson sipped his wine, holding the glass just long enough to look ordinary. But inside, the note's warning kept echoing. Don't react. Whoever wrote it knew something. Knew enough to risk slipping a message across a table under the eyes of the manager. He glanced toward the back office door. There he was, the branch manager. Crisp shirt, shiny pen in the pocket, charm turned up high for a group of regulars. Outwardly polished, inwardly careless. A man who smiled at customers but quietly rewrote the rules of his own staff. Jackson remembered something he'd told a group of regional managers years ago. If you want to know if a restaurant is healthy, don't ask the GM. Watch the staff at 7 a.m., see how they pour coffee, see how they look at each other when they think no one important is watching. Tonight, the lesson came back with brutal clarity. The waitress's small act of courage had exposed the first crack. And Jackson knew that where there's one crack, there's always more. He leaned back in his chair, eyes lowered to the folded paper beside his plate. 5 words that changed everything. He wasn't here for wine, he wasn't here for dinner. He was here for truth. And it had just found him. The paper still rested beside the wine glass, edges damp from a ring of condensation. Jackson didn't touch it again. He didn't need to. The words had already burned into his memory. Across the dining room, conversations rolled on as if nothing had happened. Guests laughed, glasses clinked, and the chandelier light spilled across polished tables like a performance staged to hide what lived beneath. He let the hum of the room settle into background noise, the way a detective listens for what isn't being said. The waitress, her name tag read Cassie, moved with the same quiet rhythm as before. She refilled water at one table, cleared plates at another, her movements practiced but not mechanical. She was working, truly working. But Jackson noticed something sharper. Every time she neared the register, she slowed, then pivoted away. Not once did her hand reach for the terminal. Instead, 2 young men kept close watch over it. One, hair slicked back, pressed a card into the machine, stepped back, folded his arms, and smirked at a joke whispered by the other. They looked more like gatekeepers than servers, guarding the flow of every payment. Tips. Jackson's mind connected the dots. Cassie had warned him without saying a word. He leaned slightly, enough to glimpse the manager through the glass of the back office. Brad Coleman. He remembered the name. The man carried himself like the restaurant was a stage built just for him, shirt crisp, pen shining, smile polished. But behind that smile, Jackson could feel the weight of neglect. Brad wasn't managing a team, he was managing an illusion. The illusion had worked on paper. The branch showed strong revenue for 3 straight quarters, even surpassing targets. Corporate reports praised its efficiency, but Jackson remembered another line buried in the HR dashboard. 38% turnover, highest in the region. Engagement scores, dead last. None of it matched the glossy numbers in the finance sheets. Now he was sitting in the middle of the explanation. He raised the wine to his lips, the taste flat, bitter, not from the grape, but from the silence that surrounded the truth. Cassie passed his table again, placing a folded napkin beneath his fork. Her eyes flicked once toward the register, then back to him. The message was clear. Look closer. Jackson adjusted in his seat, gaze drifting toward the far wall where a trainee struggled with a tray too heavy for her hands. She stopped by table 7, unsure how to enter a comp request on her handheld device. Cassie circled back, crouched low, guiding her through the process, voice soft so no one else could hear. Jackson caught only fragments, allergy codes, modifiers, the careful tone of someone teaching with patience. Then one sentence carried clear, "Don't ask Tyler for help, he won't do it." Tyler, the nephew, the same name Cassie had whispered minutes earlier when she said the tips never reached the people who earned them. Jackson's chest tightened. The note had been a warning. The body language confirmed it, and now he was starting to see the structure. A branch built to look like success, but inside it was hollow. A system twisted by favoritism, sealed with silence. The clatter of dishes pulled him back. A busser cleared plates with quick efficiency, head down, no conversation. Around the room, guests lifted glasses, unaware that beneath their meals an entire staff was suffocating under rules they didn't set. Jackson thought of the company he'd built. Sunrise wasn't meant to be like this. Fair pay, transparent systems, dignity in every role. That had been the promise. But somewhere along the line, Brad Coleman had rewritten the script. Jackson exhaled slowly, steadying himself. Tonight was no accident. The drizzle outside had blurred the windows, but inside the truth was sharpening. He was no longer just a guest in disguise. He was an observer in a controlled failure. And the real test was only beginning. Jackson kept his seat in the far corner, posture relaxed, expression unreadable. But behind the calm, he was mapping every detail. The wine glass sat half full, catching the chandelier light. But he wasn't tasting anything anymore. The flavor in his mouth came from Cassie's warning, from the split-second pause in her eyes when he asked about tips. He watched her again. She moved between tables with efficiency that came from years, not weeks. Coffee pot balanced in one hand, napkins folded behind her back. She filled mugs before they reached empty. Her pace wasn't frantic, but deliberate. She didn't waste a step. Yet despite carrying half the floor alone, she never touched the register. Jackson knew why. Access was restricted. The system had been bent, coded to lock her out. Tyler, the young man with the slicked hair, leaned over the POS screen once more. His finger tapped through menus with a familiarity that didn't belong to a part-time server. He wasn't processing a single order at that moment. He was checking settings, toggling options as if the machine belonged to him. Chase, standing nearby, hovered but never intervened. Two gatekeepers holding control over every digital dollar. Jackson shifted, making the movement look casual, but his eyes narrowed. The entire branch's morning traffic flowed through that one terminal. Every payment, every tip, and the person doing the actual work was invisible to it. Cassie was carrying the load, but Tyler was collecting the reward. When Cassie returned to clear another plate, Jackson spoke low enough that only she could hear. "Why don't you swipe the payments yourself?" She didn't stop moving, didn't even glance at him. Instead, she leaned closer to collect a glass, voice dropping to a whisper. "I don't have access. The system says I'm supplemental staff. That means no payments, no digital tips, just hours." She nodded subtly toward the counter. "Brad sets the rolls. Tyler's his nephew. He gets full access every shift." Ends. Jackson didn't answer, but the tension in his jaw deepened. The system wasn't failing. It had been rigged. The POS platform had been designed for fairness. Every roll tied to function, every tip distributed transparently. But Brad Coleman had found the back door, carving out hidden tiers to benefit his own. Cassie hesitated, then reached into her apron. A small notebook appeared, edges worn, cover curling from use. She set it on the corner of the table as if it were nothing more than a coaster. Jackson slid his hand over it slowly, shielding the movement from view. Inside, rows of handwriting lined every page. Dates, table numbers, bill totals, Tip amounts recorded from the POS screen, and next to them, the actual tip she'd received. Red pen circled the differences. Notes filled the margins. Over and over, the pattern repeated. Discrepancy after discrepancy. Her voice cracked slightly when she spoke. I've lost more than $600 this month. But it's not just the money. It's that no one ever asks. No one checks. Jackson closed the notebook gently. Not as an ending, but as respect. He didn't say a word, but something inside him shifted. He'd studied financial reports, watched turnover rates spike, seen the warning signs, but this was different. This was evidence, written in a server's careful hand, proof of betrayal no spreadsheet could show. He lifted his wine glass again, taking a slow sip to mask the moment. But his mind was racing. The numbers lined up too neatly, the manipulation too precise. Brad hadn't just let things slide, he had built a machine to funnel value upward, away from the people who earned it. From across the room, Jackson caught sight of Brad emerging from the back office, laughing with a guest, posture polished, oblivious to the storm building at table 9. Jackson kept his gaze steady, the notebook shielded under his palm. He understood now. This wasn't just a mistake, it was design. And Cassie's quiet courage had handed him the first piece of a puzzle that was about to unravel everything. Jackson didn't flip through the notebook again. He didn't need to. Every page he'd seen matched the crack in his gut that had been whispering for months. Instinct was one thing, proof was another. And now he had both. Cassie moved back toward the counter, balancing a tray with the same steady rhythm. Jackson reached into his pocket, slipped out his phone, and angled the cover of the notebook just enough. A quick series of photos, page after page, every circle in red, every margin note. The camera's shutter was muted, hidden by the hum of the espresso machine. When he finished, he tucked the phone away and slid a folded sticky note from his wallet. In block letters, he wrote, "Keep documenting. Don't give this to anyone. Wait for me to return." He slipped it inside the notebook, closed the cover, and pushed his empty glass slightly forward, concealing the movement under the stem. At the front counter, Brad had just stepped away, vanishing back into the office. Tyler stood alone behind the register, fingers dancing over the touchscreen with a speed that looked too rehearsed. Jackson shifted his angle, catching the glow of the screen for only a second, but it was enough. User role settings. Access level advanced. Username, Tyler C. Jackson tightened his grip on the glass. This wasn't just favoritism, it was configuration, a theft disguised as system design. Clever enough to look legitimate, buried inside menus no server would ever see. A clatter near table 5 pulled his focus. A new hire, Trey shaking in nervous hands, stared at the screen of her handheld. She muttered, "I don't know how to comp this." Cassie stepped in instantly, calm, patient, guiding her through the process. She crouched, explained each button, each modifier. Then, in a whisper only the trainee could hear, but loud enough for Jackson, she added, "Don't let Tyler help you. He won't do it for you." The sentence landed heavier than any audit report. Cassie wasn't just serving tables. She was quietly holding the moral structure of the branch together, shielding new staff while the system tilted further off balance. Minutes later, Chase, the second young server, tapped the register and frowned. "Weird. I could log in yesterday. Today it says restricted." Tyler barely looked up. "Probably just a glitch. I'll take care of it." His voice was smooth, dismissive, the kind of tone that carried confidence only because no one dared challenge it. Jackson leaned back, silent. But in his mind, a map began forming. Custom subroles, limited access, redirected tips. Piece by piece, the pattern was becoming visible. The wine was cold now, untouched, but he no longer cared. His blood was heating, not from anger but from clarity. This wasn't chaos, it was architecture. Someone had rewritten the rules of fairness, line by line, and the company he built was being hollowed out from within. At the counter, Cassie passed by again, notebook hidden under her apron once more. Jackson didn't stop her, didn't thank her. That would come later. For now, the investigation had begun, quietly, fully, and Brad Coleman was about to learn that the system he thought invisible had just been seen. That afternoon, Jackson left the restaurant without a word. The drizzle had stopped, but inside him the storm was only beginning. He slid into his truck, shut the door, and pulled his phone from his pocket. 93 seconds, that was how long the call lasted. "Mara," he said, voice steady, "we have a problem." He didn't need to explain much more. Mara Lynn, head of internal investigations, had been with Sunrise for 7 years. She had quietly dismantled 3 embezzlement rings, 2 payroll scams, and 1 regional cover-up. She didn't ask questions now, she just said, "Understood." Within the hour, the POS terminal at Branch 28 was switched into silent audit mode. It looked the same to staff, but every roll change, every override, every tip distribution was now being recorded in the background. No alerts, no pop-ups. Just a quiet mirror of truth, capturing everything from the inside out. The next morning, the first findings appeared. Finding 1, the system had been modified with a hidden access tier labeled Preferred Internal. It wasn't visible on the public staff screen, but the audit revealed 3 accounts with the designation: Brad Coleman, manager; Tyler C., part-time server; and an unassigned slot called Kitchen Support 03. Finding 2. Over the last 30 days, digital tip totals exceeded $4,800. Of that, 67% had been routed through Tyler's account, even though ticket data showed he covered less than 15% of total tables. Finding 3. Payroll listed a kitchen employee named Marcus Hill, clocked in for 21 of the past 25 mornings, but HR had no record of Marcus Hill. No tax file, no onboarding paperwork, and the social security number tied to his ID was a duplicate, flagged in another branch years ago, the same year Jackson had quietly investigated Brad for suspicious staffing. The case had been dropped for lack of proof. The final detail came from finance. A shell company, Douglas Henderson LLC, had been receiving service processing fees every Friday. On paper, it looked like payments for third-party logistics, but the audit traced the contact email back to an address once used by Brad himself. Jackson sat in his truck, phone balanced on his knee, reading each line as it came in. His face didn't move, but his pulse hammered. The numbers didn't lie. Brad hadn't just manipulated a terminal. He had built a pipeline, routing tips through family, ghost employees, and fake vendors. The board hadn't seen it. Finance hadn't caught it, but Cassie had. With nothing more than a pen, a notebook, and the courage to write it down, she had done what layers of oversight failed to do. She had made the invisible visible. Jackson closed the report, slid the phone back into his pocket, and gripped the steering wheel. He wasn't ready to reveal himself yet. Not until the pattern was airtight. But when he did, there would be no room for denial. Brad Coleman thought he had hidden behind polished smiles and paperwork, but the silent audit had already stripped the disguise away, and Jackson Reeves was preparing to return, not as a stranger in a gray shirt, but as the man who owned every table, every register, every paycheck in that building. 2 days later, Jackson pushed open the glass door of Sunrise Diner, number 28, once more. The bell above gave its faint jingle, but this time he didn't wear the cap low over his eyes. No gray flannel, no disguise. He walked in with the steady presence of a man who had nothing to hide. A tailored jacket, polished shoes, the kind of posture that shifted the air in the room without a word. Heads turned, not all at once, but slowly, like a current moving across water. The staff had seen him before, but now something was different. Cassie froze for a fraction of a second, then kept moving, balancing a tray like nothing had changed. Tyler, behind the register, leaned back in his chair, smirk fading when he realized the man in front of him wasn't just another customer. Jackson didn't take a booth this time. He walked straight to the counter, laid a single black folder on the laminate surface, and opened it. Inside, pages of audit logs, screenshots of the POS system, payroll anomalies, and vendor invoices stacked neatly in order. Brad emerged from the back office, smile already on his face. "Afternoon," he began, voice smooth, but the words caught when his eyes dropped to the folder. He saw his own name. He saw Tyler's. He saw numbers he thought would never leave the system. Jackson's voice was calm, almost quiet. "You've been rewriting the rules." The room hushed. Cassie paused mid-step. The new trainee clutched her notepad, eyes darting. Even Chase, usually detached, leaned in slightly as if gravity had pulled him. Brad tried to laugh, but the sound fell flat. "There must be some mistake." Jackson cut him off, not with volume but with precision. "No mistake. 3 accounts hidden in the POS. 67% of tips funneled to one person who didn't earn them, a ghost employee who doesn't exist, and a shell company that traces back to your email. You've been building a pipeline of theft, and you thought no one would notice. For the first time, Brad's polished posture cracked. His smile faltered. His eyes flicked to Tyler, who stood stiff behind the register, hands clenched at his sides. Jackson closed the folder, sliding it forward just enough for Brad to touch it. This is what integrity looks like when it's tested. And you failed. Silence stretched across the diner. No clinking of silverware, no hum of casual chatter, just the weight of truth hanging in the air. Cassie set her tray down gently, the sound softer than a whisper, but in that moment it carried more power than Brad's entire presence. Jackson straightened, his voice still level. "You're done here, effective immediately." Brad opened his mouth to argue, but nothing came out. The staff watched, their expressions a mix of fear, relief, and something stronger recognition. For the first time, they were seeing not a stranger in a gray shirt, but the man who had built the company from nothing. Jackson didn't gloat. He didn't raise his voice. He simply reclaimed the room with presence alone, and in the silence that followed, everyone understood. The system that had been bent in the shadows had just been pulled into the light. Brad's voice cracked first. You can't just walk in here and—" Jackson didn't flinch. He let the words hang for a beat before answering, voice steady as stone. "I can, because this diner, this staff, this entire company, you've been borrowing them. They were never yours to twist." Brad's face flushed. His charm was gone, stripped down to raw panic. "You don't understand the pressure. Corporate targets, margins." Jackson placed his hand flat on the folder. "I built this company. Don't lecture me about margins. Sunrise wasn't founded on squeezing the people who serve our guests. It was built on dignity. You broke that." The room stayed frozen. Tyler shifted uncomfortably, his hands still planted near the register. Chase looked at the floor, lips pressed tight. The new trainee clutched her notepad like a shield, and Cassie, standing a few feet away, watched without moving, her expression unreadable but her eyes shining. Jackson turned his gaze on Tyler. "You've been swiping the tips." Tyler's mouth opened, closed again. He searched for words, but under Jackson's stare, none arrived. His smirk from earlier had collapsed into silence. Then Jackson looked back at Brad. "You gave him access. You created ghost employees. You funneled money into a shell company with your name on it. And while you played at being untouchable, the people who actually worked were left invisible." Brad tried again, his voice thinner now. This is corporate overreach. You don't have authority." Jackson pulled a single card from his jacket pocket and set it on the counter. Silver letters caught the light. Jackson Reeves, founder and CEO, Sunrise Restaurant Group. The silence shattered. A gasp from the trainee. A whispered, "Oh my God," from somewhere near the back booth. Tyler stepped back like he'd been pushed. Brad's face drained of color. Jackson didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "The authority is right here, and you're finished." Ugh. He slid the folder closer. "Effective immediately. You're suspended pending formal termination. The board already has these documents. Finance already traced the accounts. And by the time you walk out of this building, audit control will lock you out of every system you thought you owned." Brad swayed slightly, as if the weight of the words had knocked the ground loose beneath him. No one moved to help. The staff just watched. Jackson let the silence do the work, then turned toward Cassie. For the first time, he let a faint smile touch his face. "You kept the receipts no one else wanted to see. That notebook of yours, it's the reason this place still has a chance." Cassie blinked, stunned, but said nothing. Her hands clutched her apron, the frayed edges trembling slightly. Jackson straightened again, his tone final. "Sunrise doesn't belong to people who steal from the inside. It belongs to those who carry it, day after day, without being seen. That changes now." No applause followed. No cheers. Only silence, heavy and undeniable. But it was a different silence than before, one that carried relief, even hope. Brad lowered his eyes, shoulders collapsing as if every ounce of authority had drained from his body. For the first time in years, he looked small, and in that moment, every employee in the diner knew the balance of power had shifted. Brad didn't argue again. He stood frozen behind the counter, hands resting uselessly on the laminate surface as if it could anchor him. But nothing could. His title was gone. His control over the staff was gone, and the room knew it. Jackson turned slightly, his eyes moving from one employee to the next. Chase looked down, ashamed. but he hadn't been the architect. He was a bystander who let things slide. Tyler, on the other hand, stood pale and stiff, the swagger drained out of him. For weeks he had walked around this diner with a smirk, backed by a manager who handed him power he hadn't earned. Now, that protection had dissolved in an instant. "You," Jackson said, fixing his gaze on Tyler. "Pack up. You'll be contacted by HR. Every dollar that was taken will be tracked, and every family shortchanged will get what's owed." Tyler's lips parted as if to protest, but the words died in his throat. The silence around him had become judgment, not support. He turned away, suddenly very small. Jackson shifted his attention to the rest of the room. "Listen carefully. The tip system is being reset as of today. Every payment, every gratuity split evenly across the floor, visible to every staff member. No exceptions. If you work the shift, you see the record. If you earn it, you keep it." The staff exchanged glances. No one cheered, but something in their shoulders loosened, as if an invisible weight had lifted. The trainee's eyes welled, not with tears of fear but of relief. Even Chase nodded slowly, almost to himself. Jackson continued, calm but unwavering. "This place doesn't need gatekeepers. It needs people who show up and do the work. People like her." He motioned toward Cassie. Cassie stiffened, unsure how to react. She wasn't used to being pointed out. Her whole survival had been in staying quiet, blending into the background. But now every face in the diner turned toward her, not with dismissal, but with recognition. "You kept the record no one else wanted to see," Jackson said, his voice carrying the weight of something more than praise. "You didn't complain, you documented. You showed courage when silence was easier. Starting next week, you'll be training staff across this region, not just how to serve, but how to stand." The room remained quiet, but it wasn't emptiness anymore. It was a silence filled with acknowledgement, the kind that made Cassie's hands shake as she held her apron tighter. Brad shifted slightly, opening his mouth again. Jackson raised one hand, not loud, not forceful, just final. "Leave the keys on the counter," and Brad did. Slowly, with trembling fingers, he unhooked the set from his belt and placed them down. The sound of metal against laminate was sharper than it should have been. A door closing, a rain ending. Jackson let the moment breathe. He didn't gloat. He didn't fill the silence with victory. He simply looked at the staff, each of them in turn, making sure they understood. What happened here is not who we are, not what I built, and not what this company will ever be again. Cassie's eyes met his for the first time, steady, no longer ducking, and in that look, Jackson saw the truth that had been hiding in plain sight. A good business doesn't survive on margins and numbers. It survives on people who still believe the system sees them. That belief had nearly died in this diner. But tonight, it was being restored. The keys lay still on the counter, a small pile of metal that once carried all the weight of control. Brad's hand hovered for a moment, then dropped. He turned without a word, shoulders slumped, and walked toward the door. No applause followed, no jeers, just the sound of footsteps fading across the tile. The bell above the entrance gave one final jingle as the door closed behind him. Silence lingered, but it wasn't heavy anymore. It was cleansing. The kind of quiet that comes after a storm, when the air feels lighter, even if the clouds haven't fully cleared. Jackson looked once more at the staff. The trainee still clutched her notepad, but now her grip loosened. Chase let out a long breath, as if he'd been holding it for weeks. Tyler stood in the corner, stripped of the smirk he once wore like armor, and Cassie stood taller than before, not because anyone crowned her, but because she no longer had to hide. Jackson placed a hand on the counter, steady, calm. A restaurant can survive low margins. It can recover from bad reviews, but it cannot survive when the best people believe the system no longer sees them. That's what kills a company from the inside out. His words carried across the room not as a speech, but as truth spoken aloud. The kind of truth that couldn't be hidden in spreadsheets or washed away with customer surveys. He picked up the folder, slid it under his arm, and nodded once at Cassie. No more words were needed. Her notebook had already spoken louder than anything else. As Jackson turned toward the door, the staff didn't move. They just watched, eyes following him, the way people watch, not out of fear, but because they've just witnessed a balance shift. He stepped out into the night air, cool and sharp, the neon sign above flickering its familiar hum. For a moment he paused, looking back through the glass. Inside, Cassie gathered the tray she'd set down earlier, straightened her apron, and moved forward with a different kind of energy. Not faster, not louder, just steadier. Scene. Jackson exhaled, shoulders relaxing. He hadn't come for revenge. He hadn't come to crush anyone beneath his title. He had come for clarity, for justice, for the invisible truth that had been buried in a chipped coffee cup and a waitress's quiet courage. His voice settled low, steady. A final thought carried on the night. Fairness isn't a gift. It's a promise. One we have to make again every single day. Oh. And with that, he walked into the darkened lot, leaving behind a diner that finally felt lighter, a staff that finally felt visible, and a story that would never again be hidden in silence.